My name is Chris Baragis. I'm the co-chair for our ECIS Committee on Inclusion. We're very happy to be hosting these monthly events. They're very informative, and it's word by mouth that this group continues to grow. If you haven't gone into our ECIS website, please do so, because we try to be on weekly and monthly, putting things according to how things are happening, so they're really updated. And we also have monthly webinars on different topics, like the one we have today with Shruti Patel. Before we introduce Shruti, and Eleni's going to do that, who's a part of our SIG committee, I would like to say thank you for joining us today. And I hope to see you at our large event this year, March 17th and 18th, which is going to be the Conference on Leading Inclusion by Example in Athens, Greece. I'm sure I'm going to learn as much as you will today with Shruti's session. Eleni?
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you, Chris. So we want to welcome you in one of our webinars for the ECIS, Inclusive Education and SEL and Behavioral Support. Shruti Patel is a school counselor at Frankfurt. We are joining you from Frankfurt with Shruti. Metropolitan School of Frankfurt, and Shruti is a school counselor for grades 9 to 12. Shruti has a Bachelor of Psychology, a Master of School Counseling, and a graduate certificate in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion from University of Georgia, and also has taught at several countries. One of them is El Salvador. Shruti, how would this idea came for Shruti to prepare? Shruti had an amazing, actually, presentation in our school with a great impact to our teachers. So immediately I kind of wanted to bring this to the community, and I contacted Chris, Chad, and then Sarah at the CIS committee, Inclusive Education. So without further ado, I'd like to let Shruti start her presentation. And Shruti, we have a lot to learn from you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. You really hyped me up, Eleni, so hopefully today's session will live up to that hype. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, because at the start, I really do like to just check in and see how people are feeling and just gauge the mood of where everyone is.
And I think, sorry to interrupt you, I think Sarah just joined us. Sarah Kupke just joined us, I think. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, good. Hi, welcome, Sarah. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with that. I like to just get a feeling of where people are at the beginning. So let's start there. And how do I make this? Awesome. Okay, so again, thank you so much for joining today. I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to speak on a bigger platform. Like Eleni mentioned, I first did this presentation with our school staff because when I got here, I noticed that it was something that our teachers really had a range of understanding on, and I felt it would be really great for everyone to have kind of a 101 and baseline of how to interact with our LGBTQ+ students and really make them feel safe, welcome, and included on campus. So before we dive into all of that, take a look at this chart here. I just want you to take a deep breath or two and check in with yourself to see how you're feeling today. And then whenever you have done that, just hop over to the chat and let me know what headspace you are in. Okay, so seeing a lot of pleasant feelings so far today. Yellowish, greenish, yep. All right. Awesome. So fairly pleasant energy today. Great. So I would say I'm kind of in the same area, green, feeling pretty mellow, yellow, excited to be here. Little bit of blue. I think pretty much everyone on our staff has been sick for the last month or so, but we're hanging in there. So I know I had a bit of an introduction already, but I thought I would do a little bit more, and I promise this will be relevant or at least a little useful later on too. So just starting off, when I was a kid, I've always been a bit of a goober. I'm quirky, I'm silly, I'm weird, still am that exact person. So I'm sure you will see that throughout today's presentation. Fast forward quite a bit, I fell in love with psychology when I was in high school, and then went on to the University of Georgia twice over, did those degrees, and really liked the coursework that I did in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So fresh out of grad school, I ended up moving to El Salvador. This is at the lake there. It was one of my favorite places, and me at my office on graduation day. When I was there, I was a high school counselor as well, but I worked with just grades 10 through 12, doing school counseling as well as university counseling, which with a much heavier focus on university counseling. And now I am over in Germany as of August. So this is my 4th year as a school counselor. I have 9 through 12 students now, slightly bigger caseload, but focused fully on social emotional support. And I'm also sponsoring the Gay Straight Alliance at MSF called Rainbow Alliance, and I'll talk about them a little bit later as well. We did a few introductions in the chat. If you didn't get a chance to talk about Apricot, I love that. If you didn't get a chance to do that, I would love to hear kind of where you're coming from. And the other thing I was curious about too is what your roles are in the schools that you're at or in education. So I'll give you a minute to just toss that in the chat as well. And since we're looking like a relatively small group today, probably for the rest of the session, we will just unmute our mics and chat, because we have small enough group to do that, I think. Okay, awesome. Okay, so we've got a mix of different staff, consultants, amazing, counselor, teacher, mentor. Okay, great, thank you so much. Okay, wonderful. All right. Oh, and then this last one is me with food, and I'm in Mexico. So anytime I'm traveling, anytime I'm eating, you know that I am a happy girl. All right. So what we came here for, whether you are at a school where LGBTQ+ people can and are safely out, included, and represented, or if you're somewhere where that's not really something that is possible or maybe feels like doesn't exist, there are likely students who are at your schools that are either questioning their identities related to gender and sexual orientation, or possibly even are out to some extent. So really what I want to do today is give a brief introduction to some common terms, talk about inclusive language and pronouns, and see how we can use that to navigate our work with LGBTQ+ students, and also just increase representation of LGBTQ+ people in our schools. And all of that is in aims to create safe and inclusive environments for our students. So a few general agreements that I like to do at the beginning. One, just knowing that this is a judgment-free zone. Everyone is going to be at different points in this journey of learning, and there's not really an endpoint because things are always changing and evolving. So I just want us to know that, you know, we might all have different levels of comfort or knowledge around what we're going to talk about today, and to ask everyone to be kind and respectful and meet each other where they are at so that we can learn together. I imagine if you're working directly with students, you often remind them of this, but it's good to hear it as an adult too. It's very okay to make mistakes. Learning about LGBTQ plus language sometimes really is like learning a language. It's ever evolving. It takes time and practice to become comfortable with it. I know I'm constantly learning something new. I learned something new when I put this presentation together. I learned something new yesterday when one of our advisory groups did an Awesome Spirit Day, which I will tell you about a little later, around LGBTQ plus identities as well. I mess up sometimes. It's okay. It's important to take accountability for those things, and then just learn from them and do better moving forward. And then lastly, know that a willingness to try and positive intention really do go a long way. So try to be open-minded, ask questions when you need to understand something or someone better, and do your own research. I'm going to include a lot of resources towards the end. It's always great to take some time and do your own investigation as well and learn how to be more inclusive in the classroom. For today's sake, if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, any general questions we can take care of at the end. Okay. All right, so today, just starting off with some common terms and language. Again, maybe in this group, we have folks that are in different places with this. So the first one I've used already is LGBTQ+. So I want to break that down. And since we are a small group, we can just kind of unmute mics and share out loud and see what do these letters stand for.
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer.
Yeah, fabulous. And the plus?
Other.
Yeah, okay, yes. All right, what about this one? So expanding a little bit more, LGBTQIA2S+.
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, which A is asexual, two-spirited, and I don't know about this.
Do you think I is intersex?
It could be intersex, yeah.
Yeah, all right. And then our last one, LGBTQQIP2SAA.
I know that the other A is aromantic, I think so,
Could
and
be, yeah.
the P is pansexual,
Beautiful.
but I don't know the others.
Any thoughts for the other Q in there?
I think questioning.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we breezed through this a lot faster than I did with staff. So I'm guessing we've all got a bit stronger of a baseline understanding, but it did get a little bit more challenging towards the end. And the reason that I wanted to share this is because there are several different gender and sexual identities. Not all of them are encompassed within the acronyms that we typically see, which are usually LGBTQ+, LGBT+, LGBTQIA+. So just to acknowledge that that plus at the end really does add to that and relay inclusiveness for those other letters that might not be represented there, those other identities that might not be represented in those letters. And then also to show just how expansive this community is. There are a lot of identities that I think even I don't know. Like I said, there was a group of students yesterday that did an activity on this, and there were new terms that I learned through that too, and it was really great coming from our 6th grade students. So again, it's okay not to know everything. If you're open to learning, that is a really good place to start. So this is the gender unicorn and one of my favorite tools. So to continue with some of these common terms, we're going to get some help from the gender unicorn. And I think in order to explain this picture well, it really helps to first understand the binary system. So the binary system usually has 2 parts, and oftentimes we think of these as opposing parts. So on, off, black or white, yes or no, that kind of thing. Now, when we think through a binary lens, what we often miss is the in-between and the outside of. And so two of the common binaries that are relevant today are gender. So often we think man, woman, or boys and girls, and sex, male and female. So these binaries are really deeply woven into a lot of aspects of our day-to-day lives, and very likely also socially ingrained into us in the ways that we have been raised or in the ways that we have grown up. And so along with this often comes the assumption of heteronormativity. So thinking of heterosexuality as the normal or only acceptable sexual orientation. And then also cisnormativity, which assumes that your gender identity and or expression matches the sex assigned at birth, and that as being the norm or the only acceptable identity. So I'm going to pause here. Are we doing good so far? Give me like nods, thumbs up. Yeah, okay, great. All right. So here's our gender unicorn again. And really what I love about this chart is that it gives an amazing visual to help you break down these different aspects of gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, and sexual orientation. And it really breaks out of that way of binary thinking as well, because with each of these scales, you'll see that when we think of binary, we typically think opposites, but instead of putting these two identities that we would consider opposites on opposite ends of the scales, it really breaks that and gives each aspect a different scale on its own. So for example, what we see under gender identity here, we see male or female as one scale, we see male as one scale, and we see other gender as a third separate scale. So as we go through, I'm going to show you what this looks like as well. So starting with gender identity, as you can see, that's the little rainbow, and it corresponds in the unicorn with the thought bubble. So gender identity is really our inner concept of ourselves and the way that we call ourselves. So for me, using myself as an example, I am a woman. I am cisgender, which means that my sex assigned at birth aligns with what I perceive my gender to be. And for me, what that looks like on this spectrum, give me a second, I'm trying to look at all of you and also look at my screen at the same time. So for me, what that looks like on this spectrum is, I would say I'm pretty far up here. Don't really consider myself to be a man, so that would be down here. And really for other gender too, kind of down here. Now, the thing is, for other women, this might not necessarily be the same. So there might be other women who also identify as women, but have different kind of areas that they fall onto each of these scales. So there might be someone else who falls here and maybe here and here, and still identifies in the same way that I do as a woman. So that's just goes to say that identity is very different from individual to individual. And it's not something that we can assume just by looking at someone or hearing their voice or seeing their characteristics, which brings me to gender expression. So gender expression, again, here on the unicorn, that's these little green dots here. And this is generally regarding the external appearance or perception of someone else's gender identity. So this could be based on clothing, it could be based on body characteristics like hair or their tone of voice, it could be based on behaviors. Each culture really has their own different socially defined characteristics or behaviors that tend to be associated with what masculinity looks like or what femininity looks like. And again, not everyone is going to conform to that binary. So here again, we have that separate scale for femininity, the separate scale for masculinity, and then the other one as well for other expression. So this one's in interactive. So for anyone that is feeling brave, I would actually like to ask you to map me for this one. So you're welcome to unmute, or I think you have the ability to write on the screen yourself. So give that a go and let me know where you see me on the gender expression spectrum, and what leads you to see me in that way? Any thoughts? Oh, it doesn't let you click on the slides. Okay, feel free to unmute your mic. We can chat through it too, because if we're a small group.
Well, for you, and I don't know you. I find this really hard to do because I don't know you.
Yeah, all
and-
we've got is that intro in the beginning and then
Yeah.
what you've got so far.
So I would put you pretty much where you put your star on the identity one at the top. So I'd put you up there somewhere.
Okay,
Somewhere
where
there.
else?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Masculine is really hard. I don't know, actually. I'm just judging on, and that's the thing, I'm judging on physical appearance and like you say, your tone of voice. You mentioned that just now, which I thought was interesting, and also the hobbies you showed in your slides and the photos from previously. So that's what I'm basing my judgment on.
okay,
I don't feel comfortable making anything on masculine other because I don't know you as
Yeah.
a person, so then I find that difficult.
okay, great. Thank you for sharing. Others, thoughts?
Well, it depends as well what you think, what we think is masculine and what is feminine. For the first impression I have from you, and I don't know if I can say it's masculine or feminine, is somebody who's very strong.
Thank you.
So if being strong means it's masculine, well, then there's a little bit of it, but you know.
Okay. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is very, very dependent as well on how we're defining femininity and masculinity. So let's say from your perspective, if you had to map that kind of based off of that trait, where would you add or maybe change even a marker?
I would where you put the star for the gender identity, you put the star at the far left.
Mhm.
I would move it a little bit more in the masculinity towards the right.
Kind of here further?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Fabulous. All right. Any other thoughts?
For her.
I'd say maybe for other, you could put it next to where you put the heart for other genders.
Yeah, okay. And what gives you this impression?
I'm not entirely sure. It's just kind of a general feeling because, you know, I don't know you.
Yeah.
So I can't say why.
Okay, fair enough. Any final thoughts on that? Okay, so the reason that I like doing this is, and the reason that I asked you all to map this one for me is because I know it's hard. And that's a good thing. This is to kind of help us acknowledge that we all make assumptions, and that's simply a human thing to do. This is the way that our brains work. We process so much information daily that a lot of times we do tend to categorize quickly. And sometimes that can be really great. It can be useful for learning. It can be useful for assessing danger or threats, but it can also be very dangerous in the way that we automatically stereotype or automatically bias people. And the thing is, when we are cognizant of that, when we can become aware of the fact that, yes, we do tend to have biases, or yes, we do tend to think a certain way or categorize a certain way, we can use that to recognize when we might be using cisnormative or heteronormative patterns in our language or in our actions, and we can kind of unlearn those patterns and relearn new ways of thinking and new ways of reacting. So this is something that came up when I delivered this with our staff as well. Some folks said, you know, we've only known you for maybe a week, and that's slightly more even than you all know me, but it felt uncomfortable. And I think that it's good to know that that discomfort, even though it was just for me as a person who invited you to do that, and kind of hang on to that and know that as you're interacting with different people, just to be mindful of what assumptions might be being made, and whether that is actually true or not. And that really is the second goal of this, is to show you that while things might seem one way outwardly, like this expression, it might not always align with how a person views themselves. So honestly, I think y'all did great. I would say this is actually more or less maybe where I see myself. Look, style, behavior, I do tend to be fairly feminine, but sometimes, like, at least in my appearance, I do like to throw on something that's a little bit more gender neutral. I like to swap in menswear from time to time. And yeah, I would say there are sometimes characteristics that I display in certain situations that might come across as more traditionally masculine than feminine. So thank you for participating in that. So the next thing we will have a chat about is, sex assigned at birth, which disappeared. There we go. Which is this little double helix icon. So I don't know how true this is for many of you, but I know for me, this is not really a term that I learned growing up. It's one that is newer to me. The one that I am familiar with is biological sex. And biological sex is an outdated term. It can be harmful to our trans members of our community. It's also just not as accurate as the term sex assigned at birth, because when you think about it, that is what it is, right? So sex assigned at birth is used because when a baby is born, either the doctors or the nurses, or maybe sometimes the parents, typically use or assign a sex to describe that child based on their external anatomy. But if you will get nerdy with me for a minute, even in the scientific and biological communities, with new genetics research, biology research that has come out, really this concept of biological sex is fascinating. It's often very quickly determined in things like hospital rooms, but there's a lot of other science behind it. So it also consider, chromosomes, gonads, anatomy. There are a lot of different factors that really contribute to what this biological sex is. So if this is something that is interesting to you kind of from that scientific genetic perspective, I do have an article about that. Let me know if you're interested. I'm happy to send that to you and chat more on that. But sex assigned at birth is what we use. And then I will wrap up here with sexual orientation, which are our little red and orange heart icons. So sexual orientation can include emotional, romantic, and sexual orientation. It is also completely separate from gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth. So all of these different aspects, identities, are separate. They're just because you identify in one way on one of these scales doesn't mean that you're going to align exactly on another scale as well. A note from the website that this is from actually is that attraction that is based on gender also is not just limited to sexual or romantic attraction. There's also aesthetic attraction. There is platonic attraction, so for friendship. So that's also important to know as well. And then of course, physical and emotional attraction can be based on a large variety of factors, not limited to just these different identities that are listed here. There are a lot of different gender identities and sexual orientations that we haven't really covered yet here, and that I won't go into, but I have attached a few different glossaries at the end that are wonderful resources for that. So before we go much further, I do want to switch gears because we're going to talk about inclusive language and practice next. But I do want to be mindful of some international considerations because we all do work abroad and in different places of the world. So just a little bit of a disclaimer, I am not an expert on these things, but it is important to think about. one of the things that I ran across as I was giving this presentation is realizing that I actually don't know much about German law. I've only been here for 2 months. So it's really important for us as international educators to be aware of the different laws that exist in the countries or regions even that we are working in, but also for us to take into consideration what the culture is of the communities that we work in. Around the world, there are still several countries that have anti-LGBTQ plus laws, and that ranges from anything from lack of equal rights, so whether that's in regards to marriage or adoption or blood donation, all the way to criminalization, imprisonment, and even the death penalty. Of course, there are also other countries that are more progressive and that may vary from region to region or state to state within the country itself. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you have activist organizations that work for LGBTQ plus rights, get in touch with them. For us, we work with a group called Project Petra, and they're really familiar with all of the laws and guidelines around this. And so we use that as a reference to figure out what we can and cannot do to support our students. So for example, sometimes for us, we have to limit our use of the correct pronouns for students to in-person interactions that we have with them. But whenever we are doing something that involves official documentation, we are not allowed to use their personal pronouns. We have to use whatever pronouns were essentially assigned to them, and that match with their sex assigned at birth. Clear my drinks. Okay, so that's just one consideration to take in. And then the last part is, even if you do live in a place where LGBTQ plus people do have equal rights by law, that doesn't mean that there aren't other factors that would make it unsafe for students to come out, or even if they are out, for them to be openly out. So with that, I will move forward to some of the more actionable takeaways, but please do take into consideration and use your best judgment call based on what you know about your schools and what you know about the culture you're in, the country that you're in, to decide what you can and cannot safely do to promote these inclusive environments. And I can chat about that a little bit more later as well, just with my personal experience, because I was in Latin America before and we had a very conservative Christian community where I was. And so my work there was a lot more limited versus what I'm able to do here now that I am in Europe, specifically in Germany. Okay, so a chat on personal pronouns. So if we think back to what we said about cisnormativity, so that assumption that gender identity matches gender expression and or sex assigned at birth, that's kind of our norm or default mode of thinking that probably several of us have grown up with. We might know he, him, his, and she, her, hers as possibly being the only personal pronouns used in reference for a singular person. And although the use of gender neutral pronouns increased significantly around 2010, so only about a decade ago, they actually have been around for centuries. So one set of the most commonly used gender neutral pronouns is they, them, their. And while we use the term gender neutral to describe personal pronouns, it's not a term that we would use to describe a person. So in context, this could be Jane Doe is a student at our school. They use they, them, their pronouns. They like to go on walks with their dog. I look forward to having them in class. There are also other pronouns that might be lesser known, like she or they. YouTube is a great place to get more information on pronunciation and the different conjugations of those pronouns. And I actually found this really fun kind of gamified website where you can practice the different uses within sentences for some of those different pronouns as well. If you accidentally get someone's pronouns wrong, or notice that this is happening in conversations that you're having with other staff at your school, it's okay to pause and correct yourself or correct someone else. If it's something that comes from you, there's no need to apologize profusely or make a big deal out of it. Just correct yourself and continue. This is one of those places where that positive intention and that willingness to do the right thing and make that correction will really go a long way with students. So for example, Jane is in 10th grade and they are interested in science and studio art. Same thing if you're in a conversation with someone and you notice that they are misgendering a student or another staff member, or you know, if that's something that you feel like saying, okay, how can I disrupt this? How can I easily fix this? Correct them at the end. If they're in the middle of a sentence, let them finish and say, oh, you know, just as a reminder, Jane uses they, them pronouns. Okay, great. Carrying on the sentence, carrying on the conversation. And those reminders I think can be really helpful as well, because yeah, sometimes people slip, and that's okay, because that reminder can be their gentle reminder to get it right. Yeah, okay. So similar thing for folks that use multiple different pronouns, you can rotate those in different conversations. It's also important to note that pronouns are not necessarily tied to gender identity or gender expression. So again, kind of going back to that idea of not making assumptions based on the way that someone expresses their identity, but really waiting for someone to share, you know, okay, what are the pronouns that they like to use? And the best way to really know what pronouns to use is really to ask. So note that we ask for pronouns or personal pronouns, but not preferred pronouns, because that word preferred really implies that it's kind of a choice and that I can use whatever I'm comfortable using for you, even though that's not something that you would like me to use. So personal pronouns, fine to ask for, and just very straightforward. What are your pronouns? What pronouns do you use? Another great way to make it a safe space for that information to be offered up is to start by introducing yourself with yours. So at the beginning saying, hi, my name is Shruti, I use she, her pronouns, opens the door for other people to also share their pronouns and know that that's a place that they can safely do so in your company. Again, not all students might be comfortable disclosing their pronouns, and especially in a large group setting. This is one of those safety and cultural things we also have to take into consideration. Is it going to be an issue where you live or where you go to school if this is something that is done in a large group? What works better is to ask privately. So whether that is through a survey, through a start of the year getting to know you form, this can be a safer way for students to disclose if they feel comfortable doing so, especially for transgender, gender diverse, gender nonconforming students, especially if they have any concerns for safety, whether that's physical safety or social emotional safety, depending on the nature of your school climate, or maybe even because they're not ready to be out or they don't want to be out at school or with certain people. It helps to give examples of what pronouns are, so kind of including a checklist and leaving it open-ended as well in case there are students that maybe use unique pronouns or use multiple pronouns so that they can write in for themselves what they would like to be called. The other big thing, again, especially regarding safety here, is knowing who these pronouns can be used with. So for example, last year I had a transgender student who was only out to me and one friend at school. Her parents didn't know, none of her other friends knew, none of the staff knew. And so in my office, we would use she, her pronouns, and we would use the new name that she had chosen for herself. And in any interaction I had with any other staff, in any parent meetings that I had, we would use the names that she had been given at birth. And that's kind of the separation piece that we needed, because she was coming to terms with her own identity and starting to explore that in my space. And while that was comfortable for her with me, it was not something to be shared with everybody else. And it was also not my place to share that information with anyone else. It was her information to share when she was ready to do so. The last thing that can also be helpful in these forms is to ask students how they would like to be supported if they are misgendered by someone. Some students want to handle those situations by themselves. Some may want to just kind of, let it slide. I just don't want to think about it. I don't want to draw attention to it. And some might want you to kind of step in and provide an extra hand as well. So just have that on there as well. Let them give you as much or as little information as they feel comfortable sharing. And then if you don't know someone's pronouns, it's always safe to use the singular they until you do know. You can also simply use a person's name until you have that information. So for example, Jane loves to listen to music. Jane's favorite genre is EDM. They've been to a lot of concerts in the last year. And then lastly, and I think this one can sometimes be tricky for teachers and staff, is pronouns can change. Just like gender and sexual orientation is fluid and can change, pronouns can also change. So students may update you on this themselves, or you might need to ask them privately, especially if you have a reason for believing it. It might be different, or it might be different from what it was in the last year. So an easy way to do that is, hey, am I using the correct pronouns for you? Again, just in a private conversation. And then again, if you do these surveys and you're including that question in your start of the year survey, it can help you stay on track. I know sometimes schools will kind of pass information on like, hey, 6th or 7th transition, here's all the info you need to know about these students. That's one of those things that's really good to know for yourself at the beginning of the year. All right. So in addition to pronouns, I think it's also important to consider how we talk about LGBTQ+ folks and how we can make everyone feel safe and welcome in the way that we use language on a day-to-day basis. So how do we do that? First, we want to make sure that our language around identities is accurate and respectful. So for example, using adjectives, not nouns or verbs when describing LGBTQ+ people. So for example, we would not say, I'm so sorry.
Members, please head to the sports hall now. Would all cross-country members please head to the sports hall now? Thank you.
Okay. So for example, we would not say someone is a transgender or a gay. We would say that they are a transgender person or that John Doe is gay. So we also want to be mindful for terms that are outdated, inaccurate, or harmful. So like we talked about biological sex, no. Sex assigned at birth, yes. Sex assigned at birth, usually we will not have to refer to. Most times we don't have a reason to talk about that. So simply using the person's identity is favorable and sufficient. So John Doe is a man, John Doe is a transgender man, whatever John Doe prefers to use is great. All right, I have a lot of resources linked in this presentation. So one of them is the GLAAD Media Reference Guide in my citation slide, which also has a lot of different terms to avoid and best practice language to use as well. So we are at 2:46, so we've got about 14 minutes left. Okay, that's fine. Are we still a small group? Yeah, we're still a small group. Okay. So the next thing to consider is also LGBTQ+ representation and how we use language to normalize different types of family structures, romantic and dating relationships, and so on. So are our LGBTQ+ students able to see themselves represented in the conversations? Are they able to see themselves represented in content and curriculum? So for example, if you are teaching math or science, is there a way to easily include LGBTQ+ relationships into word problems? So instead of a man and his wife going to buy apples and oranges, can it be a woman and her wife going to buy apples and oranges, and just kind of integrating it and normalizing that into what we do on a day-to-day basis? I think this might be sometimes a little bit easier in reading selection. So for classes like English, history, humanities, languages, what kind of books are we reading? Who are the characters? Who are the authors that are telling these stories? And how are we including LGBTQ+ voices and characters in that? And real people as well from history. And then, of course, just in casual conversation too. So say you're chatting to a student in the hallway about their weekend, or you are talking about favorite books or TV or movie shows that you've seen so far. Are there any things that you've watched that you want to share about that do have that representation? Is there anything good that you're reading? Did you spend a weekend with your, I don't know, your friend and their husband this weekend and their children? That's all stuff that can be kind of naturally incorporated and woven into the classroom. And then the last big thing is to be mindful of gendered language and to substitute it for gender neutral language. So this, you might already have some of this into practice. So for example, if you're splitting up your class into different groups, rather than having boys and girls, having them divided by a deck of cards and say, okay, everybody with this heart suit get this corner, everybody that has clubs go to the other corner. Another way to do it would be by birth month. Say, okay, everybody January through March, you're over here. Everybody that is the next set of months after that, April to June, July, could be in the next group, and so on. I think one that is very common that I hear down the hallway in secondary is gentlemen behavior. So just being mindful of that kind of language that we're using and making it more gender neutral. This extends as well to families. So instead of referring to people as mom and dad, parents can be referred to as children's parents, or their grown-ups, or even who are your adults. And then same when you're communicating with families themselves. So rather than asking about a husband or a wife, we can ask everybody about partners or spouses or co-parents to really just acknowledge the different types of relationships and family structures that there are. So I did initially want to do a think, pair, share or some breakout rooms for this. To reflect on the questions that are on this slide, but we are running up a little bit against time. So I think what I will do is move forward from this. And then if we've got time, I've got like one more slide. If we've got time at the end, we can have kind of a general chat and then a bit of a Q&A. Does that sound okay? Yeah, okay. All right, so a few other things that I want to share about creating inclusive spaces. And I did this kind of by time commitment, I would say. So the first one, quick and easy, 5 minutes. One way to let students know and families know that you are a safe person to reach out to is just by including your pronouns in the different things that you have. So for this meeting, I have mine listed in my Zoom link, and as often as I can, if I'm still having Zoom meetings with families, I will update my name to have my pronouns in there so that parents are able to see that. The other one is my email signature. I have my pronouns in my email signature, and at my last school, which was in a much more conservative community, just that small detail led to at least 2 or 3 separate conversations with students about, you know, why do you have your pronouns in there? What does that mean? And then further open them up to be able to share with me about things that they were experiencing around exploring their own identities as well. Next up is the visual aids. This one might take a little bit longer. I'm so sorry. Okay. Next thing is the visual aids. So I thought this was so much fun. At my school, some of the teachers share classrooms. So if you are also in a shared space, this could be worth having a conversation to see kind of what would make the most sense. If it's in a classroom, it might be prominent people in the field that are LGBTQ folks, or if it is in English again, or in the library, it can be media books that have LGBTQ plus characters or love stories, or you know, just even regular life things, because it's just an identity and it's much more than that too, but at the end of the day, LGBTQ plus people are people and they have regular normal lives. We just want to make that something that is very normalized. And I have some resources for that too. In my office, I can't rotate you. In my office, I have a massive pride flag. I also have several different posters. Like I said, I'm the sponsor of our Gay Straight Alliance. So I have their posters in my office, and those are easy ways to kind of promote the clubs that you have at your school as well, if you do have any GSAs at your school. I also have, this was something I did last year at my school where I couldn't always openly advocate for LGBTQ plus students, but I have a pronoun pin on my lanyard, as well as a pride flag pin on my lanyard. So I always have those there. And I always have that lanyard on. And then the last piece, of course, is always active and ongoing, and that really is building community and welcoming environments through advocacy. So we want to find ways to integrate LGBTQ plus representation into the curriculum, into the content, and break down those stereotypes that come with heteronormativity and cisnormativity. So on a larger scale, we want to make sure that our policies are non-discriminative, that they take into consideration the impacts that they have on LGBTQ plus students, whether they even consider LGBTQ plus students. So for example, one thing that our admin team did this past year was working with our student council and really getting that student voice for creating a new dress code policy. Our dress code policy before, like many dress code policies, was heavily biased against our young girls, and really didn't even take into consideration how we address dress code with our gender non-conforming students and potentially any trans students that we have. And so this new policy that we have really does not focus on gender, and it focuses more on, is your clothing appropriate for the learning environment? Are you able to do the things that you need to do? Can you learn? Can you move? Can you be creative? Can you get a little dirty if you need to because you're playing outside, or you're in art class, or you're moving around on the floor in drama? And so that was a really great step. And the best part about it is that it also had our student voice included on it. And our kids now have the ability to express themselves through the way that they dress, knowing that they have a lot more flexibility and that they're not going to get disciplined for something like that. At my previous school as well, our school counseling office had 2 private bathrooms, single stall, and they were initially labeled, one was a men's room, one was a women's room. And I said, no, thank you. So I printed my own signs, and I made one a staff bathroom and I made one a visitor's bathroom. That way, whoever could use whichever bathroom was free. The only difference was that our staff bathroom had like our toiletry kits in them for our counseling team, and that's it. I know that can be sometimes a little bit harder depending on what kind of space you have, but it is really worth taking the time to explore. Just this week, I had a few students approach me that say, hey, you know, this student, we're all gender non-conforming. Can we please be roomed together on this upcoming overnight field trip we had? Because we only feel comfortable, you know, being together. And we would really love if we could have that space privately for ourselves. And I said, you know what? Yes, it's a fabulous idea. I will speak to our trip coordinator and we will work on making sure that you have a space where you feel comfortable. So a lot of different things that can be done. And then of course, on an interpersonal level, whenever there is anti-LGBTQ plus comments or behaviors that come up, which oftentimes will come up, again, we want to respond to that strongly. We want to respond to that calmly. And we always want to lead with curiosity and compassion. Sometimes it comes from a place of hatefulness and wanting to be intentionally hurtful or intentionally mean, but sometimes it might just come from a place of ignorance and not really understanding the things that people are saying or doing, especially when it comes to young kids. And that can be a teachable moment. It can be a restorative moment. And it doesn't need to be something that's punitive, because we do want students to learn and to understand why things are or aren't appropriate. And this is a whole topic on its own, so I'm not going to dig further into that right now. But again, I do have some amazing resources for that as well, that includes some case studies and even some go-to phrases that you can use to really disrupt the bias and speak up. So with practice and over time, you'll be able to make it something that's your own so that it feels more natural and more comfortable for you, and is really also going off of the context that you work in and the relationships that you have with the people that you are addressing. Lots of cool resources and swag here, some that I have talked about throughout this presentation, including flags and posters and the forms, practicing pronouns, glossaries, really like good stuff here. There's a lot of it, I know, but if you do have some time, I think it's really worth looking at. And that brings me to my end. Thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm also happy to throw my email in the chat because I know we are running right up against time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shruti. I presume the presentation will find its way to my email at one point, but because I'm interested in those resources. But my question is, I have a question, and that's about the use of pronouns, and something we're struggling with as an international school. One of our staff members asked the student which pronouns they wanted to have. It was in front of another student, so, and fair enough. The other student went home, told their parents, and the other parents went completely crazy and angry. How dare you, that the kids are too young to be thinking about this, you're trying to assign them where they need to be, whatever. So I was wondering, which is not what I think, but is there anybody here who has like a golden tip of how we can introduce pronouns in a safe way for everybody, where they're going to get it, as it were, where parents are really going to be on board? Although, like you say, I appreciate that they're from different cultures and etc. I get that, but I'm just looking for if anybody got like a golden tip without wanting to go over time, because I realize I'm over time. Sorry.
It's like, I don't know if I have a golden ticket answer for that, but I know my last school really was very conservative. And so we've just really started doing more of the DEI work, especially around LGBTQ plus students. And so what we started with last year actually was a speaker on diversity, just in general diversity. What does diversity mean? What does it look like? And that was a chat that was had with our entire staff, our students, and our families. We've also had family workshops in the past that talk about sexual development and what is appropriate and what is healthy sexual development starting from childhood onwards. And really, it is very natural for children to be able to recognize gender and to understand gender identity around themselves and perceive that from others from as young an age as 3. So I think that understanding it for some parents, understanding that from more of the scientific perspective, medical perspective, so to say, can be really helpful as well.
Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Shruti, once again for a wonderful presentation. I think it gave us a lot of food for thought for this afternoon. All of us have to go back in our own schools and figure out where things are. And I'm sure since you gave us your email, we would be able to ask you more questions as time goes by.
Absolutely.
Thank you once again, everyone else, for joining us.